Hello, thank you very, very much for joining me. This is going to be a nice one, nice and calm. There's no sparks, there's no explosions, there's no fire. Well, I mean, I really hope there's no fire. And have a nice calm afternoon talking to you about all of my sign writing equipment. I have done a couple of videos on sign writing already. We did the Motorworks sign fairly recently, and when I talked about painting that and tried to show as much as I could, but apparently I missed out a few key details that quite a lot of you have been sending me messages asking to just clear up a few things that I didn't put in that video. So this is it. Your wish is my command. Is that the saying? Your wish is my command. What I'm going to show you in this video is how I do things. I completely understand that different sign writers and different people do things in different ways. And actually, to be fair, I sometimes break my own rules. If I haven't got a pot of primer, I'll use something else. If I haven't got this, I'll do that. The best thing you can do is just get some equipment, even if it's one brush and a pot of red paint, basics, and just sit and practice. If this video does inspire you to give sign writing a go, I would honestly say, buy this book. This tells you everything you need to know with lettering, layout, drawing text, brush control, techniques. It's brilliant. Joby is one of the most talented sign writers I think I've ever met. And he's been kind enough to share his knowledge in this beautiful book. Let's transform this piece of old chipboard into a beautiful little sign. I've picked a scrappy old piece of wood. I literally found it. It was in the bin about to go outside in the skip. But you can use anything. Find an old pallet, nail some pieces of planks together, an old door. You don't have to go to a timber yard and buy an expensive sheet of plywood. You can literally use any old piece of wood. The first thing we're going to use is primer. Painting, sign writing, sign painting can be a minefield. I can completely understand how people get put off. You walk into the paint shop, I mean, even if you go to like a normal bit, like a Dulux Trade paint centre or something like that, or even in B&Q or somewhere, you walk down the paint aisle and it's like, holy moly, there are so many different types of paint. It is a bit baffling. And the sign writing world is no different, to be honest. There's lots of different brands selling their own products and their own solutions to certain problems, things like that. But over the years, I guess I've sort of got my favourites and got my way of doing things. So sharing some of that experience with you. Your car would have been primed before it was painted. The walls in your house would most likely have been primed before painting. It's porous, so if you were painting a piece of metal in primer, it will still go rusty eventually. It's not an actual barrier. It doesn't stop the rain and moisture getting through to the metal. Oh, hang on, my phone's ringing. Who's this now? Hello? Hey, how's it going? You okay? Okay, thank you very much. Speak to you soon then. Sorry. Right, what was I saying? No matter what you're doing, I would highly recommend before you paint anything, stick some primer on it. The primer is sole purpose really is to adhere and stick to a surface and to leave a nice suitable surface for the paint to stick to. So they both go hand in hand. This obviously does depend on what you're doing, and you do have to be a bit careful with which brands. Don't try not to cross over brands. I would always recommend, if you're using one brand of top coat, use their primer, and they'll be able to advise you on which primer is best. I'm moving the brush in all directions, particularly because I've got this piece of chipboard or OSB Sterling board. It's made of different fibres that are all sort of glued together, and the surface is quite rough. If you're working on like a brick surface or a rough piece of wood, moving the brush in all different directions really does help. You're just trying to make sure that you get all of the surfaces covered. To be honest, even on a really nice smooth surface, that crosshatch pattern I find helps really well to just move the paint evenly, consistently, as long as you drag that final, once you've painted the whole thing or the whole area, work in small areas, you finish with those nice, long, gentle brush strokes, nice and faint, barely touching the surface, just moving along to end up with a nice finish. You don't want big patches of paint, big thick bits and thin bits. Try and keep the paint consistency even over the whole piece and nice and thin. That's the most important thing. Don't be tempted to just be impatient and try and larrup it on and cover it all in one coat, because you never will. And if you do, what will happen is the top skin of paint, you'll put such a thick build-up of paint on there there'll be a skin that will dry over the top, a bit like on the top of your rice pudding or like your cup of tea once you've left it sit for too long. And that skin will dry and not let the air in to dry the rest of the paint. And it will dry eventually, but you'll be retired by that point. You're much better off building up lots of layers of thin coats instead of one thick one. Right, so the primer that I've used for this is a wood primer because I'm priming a piece of wood. Paragon, these guys make really, really lovely enamel paints, and this is a wood primer. If you were priming a piece of metal, you can get anti-corrosive primers. These are for metal. Zinc doesn't rust. So this paint has got quite a high zinc content in it. So it is an anti-corrosive, so it prevents the metal that you're painting, the steel, cast iron, anything like that would go rusty. Key the surface, sand the surface first, a couple of coats of that, sanding between coats, and it is a really, really good way of protecting the metal. Well, I had previously sanded down this piece of wood. Always, always, always sand down the piece of wood first. Just give it a key. Whatever you're painting, it doesn't have to be like a really rough, coarse grit. It can be quite fine, just needs to key the surface, and that creates a little bit of bite in the surface, and that really, really helps the paint stick. Once this is dry, I will sand this down again. I know it seems crazy and it's boring and I don't like doing it, but it hurts your hands, but it's really, for that nice, pristine, glass, smooth finish, all of these layers of preparation and sanding and priming and sanding will give you that nice, perfect finish at the end. So I've got a sheet of sandpaper. This is fine sandpaper, 320 grit. Imagine the brush marks are like a mountain range. All the highs and lows, where the bristles get dragged across the surface, it creates ridges. So this sandpaper, I'm just trying to take off the tops of the ridges. I don't want to sand it all off completely. If I was too aggressive with my sanding, I'll remove too much of the primer and there'll literally be nothing left. I just want to take off the worst of the highest points of the ridges just to even it out a little bit. Just going to dust that off. A dry brush would do just as good a job. Just removing any of that sanding dust that might be left in the surface. It's now lovely and smooth, nice and dry. I'm ready to go on with my top coat. Now I've decanted it into a container. I would recommend that. These cans of paint, you don't really want to leave the lid off them for too long, and you definitely don't want to introduce the brush into it with contaminants from the wood, the primer, anything else. So it's always a good idea to decant it into a small jar, put what you're going to use into a little container. Craftmaster Paints have been making paints for years. Joby Carter is a big fan of these guys as well. They can mix paint to any rail code or any paint code that you like, and their Coach enamel is what we're using. It's designed for steam engines and lots of Joby Carter's fairground rides, all these outdoor wooden, metal things that are going to live outside, have a hard life, but hand painted. You can get such a nice finish with a brush that it would look sprayed. It would look like glass. And the old school sign writers, that is such a knack that I wish I had. I'm okay, but not as good as the old guys that have been doing it for years. To be able to brush a big wide panel with a small brush and get a nice glass finish is an absolute art. It just takes practice, but it's really therapeutic, it's really rewarding, but these paints just do it so well. I would never really use the paints straight out of the can. They're very, very thick, especially on a cold day. They're very thick, a bit too thick to actually put paint straight on. So you have to add a few bits. The paint companies will sell their own reducers, which is almost like watering it down, but you're not using water because these are oil-based. So you would be using their own reducers or the white spirit, which works really well. If it's too thick, it will just be gloopy and fat and thick and it just won't work. So you need it thin enough that you can move it and manipulate it, but not too thin that it starts running and dripping and pouring everywhere. So this stuff is really good. You don't need very much, just a little, a few drops of it, but that is secret ingredient. Another secret ingredient, a few drops of this in the paint helps to make it flow. It's an oil, it's almost like a linseed oil, but it's got dryers in it, so it dries like a finish. It's really hard to explain what this stuff does, but a few drops of this, a little dash of that into the paint, it just helps the paint just feels happier. These specific paints have been around for years. Traditionally, back in the day, before my time, the company that made them was called Keeps. And I am lucky enough to have one can. This is the oldest can that I've got. So I can understand now when old people like Pete at the repair shop moan and saying, oh, the modern paints, they're nothing like they used to be. They're nothing like they used to be. These modern equivalents without the lead, without all this, they're not the same. Pete, the musical instrument restorer, talks like that all the time. Anything new and modern is not right. And you know what? The first time I opened this can and used it, I can relate and I can understand. That is a beautiful pot of paint. And with these paints, the pigments are so strong. The amount of pigment in there, which gives it that nice rich color, is unlike anything that you can get today. Craftmaster, for example, still very, very high in pigment content. So the opacity is very, very high, the color of the paint. The pigments are so strong and it's so full of pigments. They're just lovely, lovely paints. Fair enough, it hasn't got lead in it anymore, but maybe that's for the best. Joby Carter put me onto these guys and I've never looked back. They're really lovely. They do coach enamel and they have a lining and sign writing enamel. This has got even stronger pigments in it. So if you're doing lettering, this would be the one you want. If you're painting the side of something or a big panel, the coach enamel would be the one you want. Paragon. I only found out about these guys literally 4 or 5 months ago, maybe. They actually they've got quite a good little niche of all the engines and machinery, like a Myford lathe. Myford lathes are quite often in this grey colour, and they've got Myford grey. And all the old machines, Meddings pillar drills are a certain green or a certain blue, and they've got all of the machinery, they've got those colours pre-mixed in their paint, and it's brilliant stuff. I really, really like it. Very similar to Craftmaster. Flows really nicely. They also do all of the additives like the brushing reducer. Their own reducer, the white spirit based sort of thinners, is really nice because it's actually got some dryers in it, so it helps the paint dry a little bit faster. But I'm loving it. They're really, really nice. Lovely, lovely people, very easy to deal with. They can mix any paints to any colours that you like. Paragon, give them a try. It will take overnight to dry. Ideally, leave it 24 hours. In the winter when it's freezing cold, maybe more. You can't rush perfection. Worn the wrong colour jumper, I'm sorry, so any continuity is going to be completely out the window. Very pleased to say that the yellow is dry. Nice and hard, it's gone perfectly well, so we can start talking about lettering. I would love to be able to draw this on by hand, but I can't. I'm not good enough. I've got this logo from the computer. I've drawn it on the computer, printed it out, tiled it, so this is the same size as my piece of wood. The reason why I got into sign writing and I actually went and met Joby and wanted to do this was during my set design days, because I was making a bar section or some random prop that needed a stripe around the top of it or a line around the edge, and instead of just printing vinyl stickers and sticking them on, I wanted to make it a little bit more unique, a little bit more personalized, and do it myself on location, wherever we are, whatever's happening in the workshop. Whilst other people are making it, I could be sitting there and just painting the logo. I was actually always painting people's logos that they would send me, so I never needed to draw things freehand. It was always, they'd send me the file of the logo, I would print that out, transfer it to the board and paint it on. Now I've got my logo, I've got my text, I've drawn it on the computer. This could be anything at all. You could do it in Word art, or whatever computer program you've got. There is an option on the print menu to tile. So where it says like fit to page, scale to fit, or leave full size, there's an option there, tile image. And so actually the actual artwork on the computer is the size of my final board. And then it just cuts it up into as many A4 pieces as possible as it needs. And then I just come here like a lemon and stick them all together with pieces of sellotape. But it works really well. And when we were doing set design, honestly, 4 meters long, it was just a million pieces of A4 paper printed on my little home printer here. There's nothing fancy. A4 bits of paper, spend the time, stick it all together, and you can create as big epic things as you like, just with really basic equipment. So you don't need the huge printers and transfers and all this other stuff. It's just A4 pieces of paper, finding that option on the print settings that says tile, then the world is your oyster. All right, I'm just going to cut this out. Good. All right, there we go. Cut to size, stuck together. How do I transfer this image to my painted board? This is the step I left out of my previous videos, just for time. So there are two main processes or techniques that I usually use. The first one is this clever little guy. It's a pounce wheel. So you hold this handle, and then it's got this sharp wheel on the end. And it's a really simple case of just trundling around the outline, pressing down, not too hard, but to make sure that these sharp teeth pierce the paper. Right, now I've got a piece of paper with loads of holes punched in it. Flip that piece of paper over. Get that piece of fine sandpaper that you had. On the back, you're left with lots of little kind of volcanoes as it's kind of coming through. Just skim over the top of those, sand the top of them off, and all that does is removes that bit of paper and just leaves a bit of a larger hole, which is a better chance of it all the actual process working. Well, I could see through them, so that's a good sign. All you need next, this guy is called a pounce pad. It's basically, in there is a load of chalk powder. I can't get it open, my fingers are too cold, but in there, that's the lid, in there is a load of chalk powder. And then on the bottom is this little pad. So then it's just a case of laying this piece of paper on top of my board and then just dabbing that pad over the top of the perforations. Those tiny bits of chalk will work their way through the holes and sit there on the holes. When you carefully remove the piece of paper, I should, fingers crossed, if everything works out well, be left with the outline of dots in chalk on the final piece of board. But I'm not going to do that yet because I'm going to show you the second process. It's great on large, big curves. You can trundle it around really nicely. But on small lettering like this, I find it a bit more difficult. So we're going to use a stick of charcoal. Flip the piece of paper over. So on the back of the piece of paper where the lettering is, just going to rub this charcoal. Finally, I can bring my board back in. Now very carefully, I'm going to lay the piece of paper back on top. I want to be careful not to move it around too much because that charcoal will make a right old mess. This is the critical time to spend some time, make sure you get it all lined up and even. Measure the sides, measure the border, make sure it's exactly where you want it, and then tape it down. The main lettering has been pounced on with the chalk. Now the lettering, the small body of text at the bottom, I've got a nice sharp pencil, my ruler, and I'm going to spend some time now and just literally trace, put some fairly decent pressure on with my pencil through the paper, and the charcoal rubbing on the back is going to transfer itself straight onto the bottom. I'm going to use my ruler, try and keep the lines nice and straight and keep it as accurate as possible. All that's left to do is paint the sign. I've got my brush. It's a Series 2112, which is a lovely brush. Really good all-rounder brush for most kinds of lettering. Obviously it has its restrictions, but it's a lovely brush. And I've gone for a lovely navy blue. Let's see what this looks like. You just drift off into another world. I'm concentrating so much. I'd completely not realised the camera had run out of battery. It's now 8 o'clock at night. It's pitch black outside. I'm late to get back home. Very, very therapeutic sitting here. You forget about everything else that's going on. This is why I wanted to do this video, just to encourage people to have a go. Once you've got the basics, you can expand bit by bit eventually, but it's just getting that first step. I think I've got a bit of practice to do with my lettering at the bottom, but it's not bad. It's not bad. What do you reckon? It's okay. Everything always looks better with a line around it. So I think that's the last thing I'm going to do, is put a little line, a border around it, just to frame it nicely, and then I'm finished. It's now 8:30. I've been doing this all day. It doesn't take that long to paint a sign. It just takes a long time when you're filming it on your own. I really hope that this video has been helpful to a lot of people. I know it's not really a sign writing tutorial, but there are lots more people out there that are doing tutorials, a lot more talented than me at the actual sign writing. Joby Carter for one. There's a ton of people out there now, if you Google it and have a look around, that are doing courses and training and books and online courses. I just wanted to give you a bit of an introduction to the materials, the processes, a bit of an intro into how things work. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Please make sure you subscribed. I really appreciate that. Leave me a comment and I'll see you next time. Take care. Thank you.